According to the Kinsey Institute's own figures, between 317 and 2,035 children were used in these types of sexual experiments. Kinsey and his associates admit they use the diaries of sexual predators for much of their research of the sexual behaviors of children. But in the name of science, their identities were protected, even after Kinsey's name was linked with Nazi pedophile Fritz von Balusek.
It was roughly 60 years ago when von Balusek was arrested for the rapes of many children and the possible murder of a little girl. The judge, when they tried von Balusek, who was a very aristocratic fellow and had a very high place in the legal profession, when he finally came to trial, the judge said, I can't believe that you did this. You did this all for Kinsey, it would appear. And von Balusek replied, well, Kinsey himself asked me to do this.
But these headlines never hit the stands in the United States, and so the Kinsey propaganda campaign continued.
That the German papers at that very time were printing that Kinsey had been corresponding with this Nazi pedophile, and then it never made it to our newspapers, is clear indication of the control that the Rockefeller Foundation had, along with Indiana University.
Recently, the New York Times, exploring the Hollywood version of Kinsey, reported an important fact that Dr. Reisman has been telling us all along. Kinsey corresponded with many pedophiles, von Balusek and another by the name of Rex King, who molested hundreds of little boys and girls between the ages of 2 months and 15 years. He was also known as Mr. Green.
For the New York Times to actually report that Kinsey wrote to Dr. von Balusek and to Green and told them both that he wooed them and that he rejoiced at the information that they sent about their sexual violations of children, that's a major blow for the Kinsey Institute.
Knight says Kinsey's influence has had far-reaching consequences most people have only become aware of recently.
Kinsey went around the country testifying before state legislatures, most notably in Illinois and in California, advocating that sex offender penalties be lowered because his research proved that people aren't really that harmed by this kind of sex, that it's the hysteria that accompanies child sexual abuse that is the real problem.
That children are sexual from birth then justifies the idea that children can not only have sex with each other, but they can have sex with adults if they're loving adults and loving sex, and in effect that they can begin to see the laws of age of consent drop dramatically, which they did post-Kinsey through the American Law Institute Model Penal Code.
The Model Penal Code was created by a group of law professors, judges, and lawyers, and was the blueprint that legal professionals use to revise our criminal laws. Authorized Kinsey biographer Gaithorne Hardy is quoted as saying, "The Model Penal Code of 1955 is virtually a Kinsey document. At one point, Kinsey is cited 6 times in 12 pages.
In the areas of sex crimes, the law of the American Law Institute reflected the Kinsey studies and ultimately was enacted into state law.
Former Senator to California, Assemblyman Ray Haynes, says Kinsey's influence on the culture has caused irreparable damage to victims of sexual crimes.
And so we ended up putting child molesters in prison for 3, 4, and 5 years. Well, we now know Kinsey was wrong. Child molesters are child molesters for life. And what we have done since the adoption of these laws is damaged thousands of children's lives because we've let child molesters back out on the streets based on a faulty study.
I would like to see an investigation of all of this. Get it out in the open. Let the American public make the determination as to what happened, who did it, why, and let our congressmen, our legislators do their proper job in this regard.
Not surprisingly, porn tycoon Hugh Hefner was inspired by Kinsey's studies.
Hugh Hefner cited Kinsey often in his early Playboy philosophy columns in Playboy magazine to justify pornography and say that science has shown it doesn't hurt anybody, might as well mainstream it. Well, America bought that message, unfortunately, But one reason Hefner included the Kinsey studies in his magazines was to give it literary or scientific merit so he could get around the pornography laws of the time.
30 years ago in Roe v. Wade on the abortion issue, Kinsey was used to justify legalizing abortion. Kinsey's the one who gives them the so-called hard data. Hard data being that more than 25% of our married women are having abortions with no problem, and 95% of our single women who are pregnant are having abortions with no problem. And therefore, since so many women are having abortions and there are no problems, we should legalize abortion.
Kinsey's influence has gone far beyond the spread of pornography, the legalization of abortion, and the loosening of our sex laws. Kinsey thought of himself as a social engineer.
Kinsey provided the intellectual firepower for a lot of groups, like the ACLU, like Planned Parenthood, like the Lambda Legal Defense Fund, the homosexuals lawyers, NAMBLA, to break down the sexual mores that protected our women and children from sexual predators.
Alfred Kinsey worked with Planned Parenthood to create SIECUS, the Sex Information and Education Council of the United States. And so the Kinsey model of child sexuality, derived from the actual molestation of kids, became the animating principle behind most sex education until abstinence programs came along.
Kinsey was the inspiration for Harry Hay, who started the homosexual movement, as a political movement. But when he read Kinsey, he said he determined that, hey, if 10% of the population is homosexual, which Kinsey claimed at the time, 10 to 37%, then we have a political movement here. And we can redefine ourselves not as people who engaged in sodomy, which was against the law, not as people who did something, but as people who just are something, and as a discriminated class.
Kinsey's legacy is enormous. His cold, dead hand is still on the throttle of the sexual revolution.